Richard stood on the balcony edge, 40 floors above the city grid. Below, the traffic pulsed in steady, glowing lines. He had reached the summit, 20 years of missed weekends. Relentless hours and calculated risks had finally culminated in the seven-figure balance displayed on his screen. The wind whipped against the glass, but he did not move. He leaned forward, his hands locking onto the cold metal railing. His grip tightened. The skin over his knuckles pulled thin and pale, turning stark white against the dark steel. He watched the lights of the city, but he did not see the architecture. He saw the potential for collapse. Every flicker of a distant office tower felt like a threat to the foundation he had spent half a lifetime building. He breathed in the night air, but it felt thin and sharp. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a movement in the skyline that might signal the start of a decline. The silence of the penthouse was absolute, yet his mind raced through potential losses, calculating the speed at which his progress could be erased. He did not let go of the rail. Richard pulled his hand from the railing, his palm damp from the cold metal. He reached into his pocket and withdrew his phone. The screen illuminated his face, casting a harsh, artificial glow against the dim room. He tapped the icon for his portfolio. The numbers flickered, static. He refreshed the feed, watching the spinning icon with a fixed, unblinking stare. No change. He locked the device, slipped it back into his pocket, and took 3 paces toward the window. He stopped. He pulled the phone out again. The same red and green bars mocked his stillness. He checked the time, then the market index, then his own balance. He repeated this cycle 3 times in under 2 minutes. His thumb hovered over the refresh button, his pulse visible in the vein at his temple. 20 years of labor had boiled down to these digital pulses, a constant stream of data that demanded his total attention. He ignored the view of the city entirely. He paced the length of the carpet, eyes glued to the glass screen, hunting for a dip that existed only in his anticipation. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a monitoring station where the only variable was his own mounting exhaustion. The phone vibrated against the desk, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the quiet. Richard did not reach for it. He pushed the device away, sliding it across the polished surface until it hit the wall. His fingers brushed against something else, a worn, leather-bound volume resting near his lamp. He had not opened it in years. He pulled the book toward him, the dust rising in the lamplight. He flipped through pages creased from past use. His eyes caught a single, static sentence. Riches without wisdom are often short-lived. He read it again. The words hit him with the weight of a physical blow. He looked up at the ceiling, then back at the ink on the page. His vision blurred, not from the text, but from the sudden, jarring recognition of his own fragility. He had spent 2 decades piling gold higher and higher, yet he had built nothing beneath it. No bedrock, no structure. He traced the letters with a trembling finger, feeling the texture of the paper. The mountain of wealth he had constructed suddenly felt like sand under his feet. The city lights outside no longer looked like assets. They looked like a distraction from his own hollow core. He closed the book, his hands resting heavily on the cover, and sat in the silence of the room. The market could crash tomorrow, and he would have nothing to hold on to. Richard stood up. He walked to his laptop, closed the lid, and pushed it into a drawer. He took his checkbook and sat at the desk, drawing a thick line through his monthly projections. Half. He slashed his daily expenditures by 50%. The numbers on the paper looked small, almost insignificant, but they represented a new boundary. He picked up his keys, intending to drive to the local dealership he had scouted for weeks. He walked to the garage, his hand on the door handle of the sleek, high-end vehicle he had planned to buy today. He looked at the reflection of the car in the polished floor. He felt the familiar pull, the desire to signal his status to the world. He gripped the door handle, then let go. He stepped back. He turned his heel and walked out of the garage, leaving the keys on the workbench. He returned to his desk, cleared away the brochures for luxury goods, and replaced them with a simple notepad. He began to track every cent with meticulous care. He chose the quiet satisfaction of a balanced ledger over the fleeting dopamine hit of a purchase. The house felt colder, but for the first time in years, the space felt entirely his own. He was not just saving money. He was reclaiming the hours he had spent working to fund a life he did not actually inhabit. The office intercom buzzed, breaking the silence of his morning ledger work. A familiar voice crackled through the speaker, urgent and sharp. It was an old associate, a man who had been his partner in a dozen previous high-stakes ventures. The offer came through the line in seconds. A new deal, triple the returns, guaranteed within the month. Richard felt his heart rate climb. The old version of himself would have already authorized the transfer. His fingers twitched toward the keyboard, hovering over the execute key. He could see the projected profits dancing on his monitor, a familiar, intoxicating lure that had defined his life for 20 years. His throat went dry. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles whitening as he fought the sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. The promise of easy money pulled at him, a physical weight dragging his focus away from the ledger. He stared at the screen, his breath shallow, feeling the cold sweat of a man standing on a ledge. The screen flickered. The numbers seemed to pulse, demanding his validation. He stood up, pushed his chair back with a sharp scrape against the floor, and began to pace the length of the room. He was trapped between the man he had been and the man he was trying to become. Richard looked at the cursor blinking on the screen. It was a digital heartbeat, rhythmic and demanding. He could hit enter, authorize the transfer, and watch the numbers climb. The familiar rush of potential wealth flooded his nerves, sharp and acidic. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He grabbed the edge of the screen and forced it downward. The click of the casing snapping shut echoed in the quiet room. The glow of the monitor vanished, leaving the desk in shadow. He pushed the chair back and stood up. His legs felt heavy, but his mind was clear. He walked to the window, leaving the laptop behind on the dark wood. Outside, the city moved in its chaotic rhythm, indifferent to his choice. He watched a single taxi weave through the traffic below. He did not check his phone. He did not calculate the potential loss of the deal he had just abandoned. He took a long, slow breath, feeling the air fill his lungs without the constriction of anxiety. He walked away from the desk and into the center of the room. He had traded a gamble for silence, and for the first time in 2 decades, the silence did not feel like a threat. It felt like a foundation. Richard moved his workstation to a smaller desk, one that faced the window rather than the ticker tapes. A week later, he opened his doors to a young entrepreneur who had spent months knocking. They sat across from each other, surrounded by blank whiteboards. Richard pointed to the market data, but instead of charting growth, he explained the mechanics of patience. He watched the young man struggle to grasp the value of waiting, seeing the same frantic energy he himself had once burned. The teaching process required him to articulate his own hard-won lessons, turning his experience into a tangible tool for another person. This exchange left him drained but clear-headed. When evening arrived, he did not reach for his phone to check the overnight markets. He walked to the kitchen, prepared a simple meal, and followed a strict lights-out routine. He lay down in the dark, his body relaxed, his heart rate steady. There were no phantom alarms ringing in his ears. He closed his eyes and drifted into deep, uninterrupted sleep. The morning light arrived hours later, finding him rested, alert, and entirely removed from the volatile cycles that once dictated his worth. He had replaced the hunger for more with the habit of enough. The seasons shifted beyond the glass, but the rhythm inside the penthouse remained steady. Richard no longer tracked the daily fluctuations of the indices. His desk was organized, his sleep was sound, and the frantic pace of his previous life had dissolved into a quiet, deliberate existence. Then came the afternoon. The heavy mahogany door opened. His grandson stepped inside, his boots clattering against the floorboards, bringing the unfiltered energy of youth into the stillness. Richard watched him move through the room, touching the books, looking at the city with wide, unjaded eyes. The boy stopped at the large window, peering down at the distant, moving specks of traffic. He turned back, his gaze landing on Richard with the sharp, honest curiosity that only a child possesses. The air in the room seemed to sharpen as the boy walked over. Looking up at his grandfather with a look of genuine wonder, he asked the question that hung in the silence like a challenge. "Grandpa, what is it like being rich?" Richard felt the weight of his 20 years of labor, the missed weekends, and the eventual realization of his own folly. He stood up, his joints fluid and strong, and looked down at the boy who held the future in his hands. He knew the answer he was about to give would define more than just money. Richard did not reach for his tablet. He did not pull out a bank statement or point toward the city grid. He walked to the wooden mantel, his movements slow and deliberate. He lifted a framed photograph of his family, the edges worn from years of handling. He knelt, bringing his eyes level with the boy, and placed the heavy frame into the small, waiting hands. The boy looked at the faces in the picture, then back at Richard, his brow furrowing in confusion. Richard spoke, his voice steady, stripped of its former urgency. "Real wealth is sleeping peacefully," he said. He tapped the glass of the frame. "It is having the choice to say no to the wrong things, the health to enjoy your days, and the character to keep your head steady when the world around you crashes." The boy looked down at the photo, his eyes widening as the focus shifted from the gold on the walls to the people in his hands. The frantic curiosity vanished, replaced by a sudden, quiet understanding. In that moment, the boy mirrored the calm that Richard had spent 20 years struggling to build. The air in the room felt lighter, the silence no longer heavy with expectation, but filled with the weight of something far more enduring than currency. The boy eventually left, his footsteps fading into the hallway, leaving Richard alone in the quiet expanse of his home. He returned to his desk, picked up the book he had studied for months, and closed it with a soft thud. The pages were no longer a manual for gain, but a record of his own evolution. He looked out at the city once more. The lights below flickered with the same chaotic energy that once defined his heartbeat, but now he viewed them from a distance. He understood that markets would always fluctuate, rising and falling with the tide of human panic and greed. These were liquid assets, prone to evaporation. But the discipline he had forged, the wisdom he had acquired, and the purpose he had anchored in his family were permanent. No economic crisis could ever liquidate these holdings. He stood up, his movements unhurried. He walked through the rooms, pressing the switches one by one. Each light clicked off, plunging the penthouse into a soft, velvet darkness. He lay down, his head hitting the pillow with the weight of absolute certainty. He breathed deeply, letting the silence settle into his bones. For the first time in 20 years, he did not reach for his phone. He closed his eyes and slept soundly, finally truly wealthy.